Thank you, Don, and thank you to Durham for having me here today. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very pleased, and also very pleased with the fact that we do know who the President of the United States will be on January 20th. We had a decisive election on Tuesday. I'll go into that a little bit: who won, why, and what does that mean for the U.S. What does that mean for Canada? But to begin with, apropos of the coming weekend and what Tim had mentioned earlier, I want to extend a heartfelt thanks on behalf of the American people for Canada's contribution to our joint North American security in NORAD, also your strong leadership in NATO and your sacrifices in Afghanistan. Thank you very much. Thank you. You're, as I like to say, you're good friends and sometimes better than we deserve. Thank you. So, the election that we just had on Tuesday was our 56th election in our 236-year history, and President Obama is the 44th President of the United States. That means we've had 44 peaceful and democratic transitions of power in the United States history, and that's a feat that we're all very, very proud of, notwithstanding the acrimony in the election season, which is par for the course. It's usual. It's something that we're very proud of in our history. So basically, the president won, of course. He carried the day with about 51% of the popular vote versus 49. But of course, in our system, the Electoral College matters, and he ended up with 303 electoral votes to Governor Romney's 206. Florida still hasn't been decided. When I checked, that would add another 29 electoral votes either way, which won't make any difference. And the president will be reinaugurated again come January 20th. Which just to give you a little bit of a background, if you had asked me this time last year, will the president be reelected, I thought that he wouldn't be reelected. And that's primarily due to our continued economic challenges that we have, even though, as Carlos pointed out, we've had some slow growth. Much work remains to be done. And usually the electorate takes that out on the sitting president, fair or not, whether it was his fault or not. And of course, we all know that the recent unpleasantness predated President Obama's beginning of his term in January 2009. And if you look at the poll trajectory, it tended to reflect that. It was very, very tight between the president and Governor Romney right up until the end of August. And the Democrats had their convention, and you started to see President Obama pull ahead in the polls until we got to the first debate in October, where he had a poor showing, and then the polls tightened again. And then in the last 3 weeks to the election, you really started to see a spread in the statewide polls and the battlegrounds where it mattered, President Obama pulling ahead. We had two very good candidates, and it was a hard-fought election. They represented two different views of government and the role of government in the United States. So why did the president win? Well, beyond tactics, I think he ran a almost flawless campaign. They were very good in fundraising, getting out the vote, and on messaging. Equally so, I think Governor Romney's campaign was also very good as well. But for me, and again, I should preface this by saying this is my own personal opinion as a representative of the U.S. people. I represent both Democrats and Republicans, but for the purposes of this back-of-the-envelope economic or political analysis, in my opinion, it came down to identity. The number one issue in the election was the economy. And Romney was, according to the polls, seen as actually better on handling the economy than President Obama had been. So why did the president win? I think that it was his compelling narrative. And when he came down to it, the electorate, those undecideds in the middle who really swing the election, looked at it and say, which one of these candidates is going to be better able to understand my challenges and my needs? And so it came down to identity, which Governor Romney had come from a private capital background, very successful. In fact, one of the most wealthy candidates to ever run for president, even in real terms, I think. Whereas President Obama had come from much more humble beginnings, and even as earlier as little as 12 years ago was in tough financial times, as he would mention, as he's mentioned in the campaign before. So, folks, I think at the end of the day, looked at it and says, well, I've got challenges with retirement, putting my kids through school, health care, which one of these candidates is really going to understand me better? And that was enough to narrowly eke out a victory for the president. As I said, 51% of the popular vote. What it also says is a thin majority of U.S. voters sided with the Democratic view of government, its role in the society, basically to provide a social safety net, responsible regulator of the private sector, and a significant role in the economy and people's lives in the U.S. And not surprisingly, I think Hurricane Sandy played into that towards the end. In fact, that last week you saw a significant jump in polls for the president, and I think that folks had taken a look at the hurricane, the disaster, and the effective role that government can play in those situations. And that's one of the reasons why some of the last-minute undecideds broke for president, in my opinion. So what does this mean for the U.S. and Canada? Well, for the U.S., it means our continued slow recovery and responsible debt reduction. As the president maintained in the campaign all along, had Governor Romney been elected and they decided to go forward with Congressman Ryan's budget plan, it would have cut too much too soon and probably would have ended up the U.S. coming back into a recession. So moving forward, I don't think we'll see a new stimulus, although there is some in the White House's 2013 budget which has not been passed yet, transportation, schools, but I think that's unlikely to remain intact. We do have, as Carlos mentioned, the fiscal cliff looming, and basically what that is the Budget Control Act of 2010, whereby at the deadline on January 1st, 2013, several things are automatically happen, even if we don't take any action. The Bush tax cuts that were put in place 2001, 2003 will expire. Payroll tax cut that President Obama put in place will expire. So you'll automatically see instantly less disposable income for folks. Their paychecks take-home pay will be smaller. Certain tax extenders will expire. Extended unemployment insurance will expire as well. At the same time, I believe, $2 trillion total with these tax revenue increases and budget cuts, a 13% across the board budget cut. And many analyses that I've seen have generally look at this and say, if all of this is implemented, if the fiscal cliff happens without any changes, it could be a 3.25% hit to GDP in 2013. And that may send us back into a slight recession earlier part of the year, but with a recovery towards the end of the year. If some sort of deal is struck to moderate this, then generally the economic analysis I've seen has been from 1.25% to 2% hit on our GDP. I personally think it would be somewhere around 1.5. Aside from that, let's say no compromise is reached. The federal government, the administration, through administrative actions, the executive branch can blunt the initial impact through measures, shifting some money around as they work for a solution. So if nothing happens on January 1st and we end up getting a budget and a deal sometime later in the first quarter, it can be retroactive and go back to January 1st. So I don't view this as such a gloomy scenario as you see often in the press. And as we've seen in the markets were down over the previous 2 days. I don't know, haven't seen yet what they're doing today. I think that's the market sort of pricing this in. The assumption is, with Obama's president's reelection, more divided government, and they won't be able to reach some sort of consensus. So hopefully the market will be pricing it in now, and we won't have any other turmoil. But in the end, in terms of the economy, the market is sometimes somewhat of a sideshow. Why do I think there'll be some sort of compromise? Well, I think that because of the election, the political dynamic has changed, whereas before you had little incentive to come to a compromise on the Republican side of the aisle, because in the fight to raise the debt ceiling in 2010, where this came out of, many Republicans absolutely refused to even consider any kind of tax increases. Okay, well, since the president won re-election and the House is still with Republicans and the Senate is still with the Democrat, the dynamic has changed a little bit. If an impasse continues, I think that will probably hurt the Republicans in Congress more than it will hurt the president. The Republicans have now had 2 electoral defeats in a row. If they want the White House in 2016, they're going to have to show some results and some work. And quite frankly, it's very difficult to blame the president if we take no action between now and January 1st and those Bush tax cuts expire which amounts to a tax increase, which is the solemn pledge that many Republican House of Representatives made, is not to increase taxes. So they're in a much more difficult position. It's not to imply the president will play brinkmanship with the U.S. economy, but I think both sides, in terms of the president's legacy and in terms of the Republicans' electoral chances in 2016 and what they learned from this election in terms of who supported them and who didn't, they'll probably come to some sort of compromise. There's a lot of things out there that they could do. They could go forward with eliminating the Bush tax cuts. They could phase it in a third at a time over the year, and in lieu of more. In lieu of the budget cuts that the Republicans are looking for, the devil will be in the details, whether it comes out of national security spending, defense spending, or comes out of entitlements. But there again, I'm pretty positive about that. The president had come to the table in 2010 and put entitlements on the table and offered a good deal. Unfortunately, the Republicans couldn't accept the fact that there would be some tax increases. So it won't be easy, but I think there will be a deal will be struck, and we'll take a little bit of a hit to our GDP. But other than that, I think things are generally looking good for 2013 for our economy, and that's good for Canada because that's getting to the point of what is in it for Canada for the results of this election. Of course, the best thing we can do is get our economic house in order. You are our major trading partner. We're your major trading partner. And as Carlos had pointed back, our economy is coming back slowly but steadily. Canada has always been and will always be in the best position to take advantage of that. Some of the economic indicators that you look at are trending positively. Consumer borrowing is up. It's trending up. Construction spending is positive growth. Consumer confidence is near pre-crash levels. Productivity is rising. Our personal income is rising. Our savings rate is declining, which might suggest that we're done with our deleveraging, at least in household debt. New home sales are rising a bit. Housing supply is at balance, which is 6 months of supply of houses for sale, which is typically thought of as balance. Existing home sales are rising a bit. Prices have come back in most markets, although not in all. And in the markets where they haven't come back, I think we've definitively seen a bottom in that. Housing starts are way up recently. Our industrial capacity utilization is at 78%, which is about where it was before the crash. Positive industrial production growth and inflation, as Carlos pointed out, is right where it should be.